Okay, so you've seen my previous videos. I hope if you've seen them by now, you realize that I'm not an alarmist and that everything I said has come true because, as I said, I'm using science, data, and observation of this virus to bring you, um, if you will, a bit of a crystal ball that they say that we are lacking. Unfortunately for Washington State, they had a crystal ball handed to them upon a silver platter. They could see the future and they dropped it. On February 21st, Friday, February 21st, Italy had two community spread cases, no link to travel, no link to anyone who traveled, occur in the Lombardy region of Italy. By the end of the weekend, they had implemented mass quarantine of 50,000 people into their homes and shut all local schools, coffee shops, things like that. All the local businesses and schools were closed. As of today, they have over 2,000 cases and 52 deaths that have all occurred since Friday, the 21st of February, when they took immediate and drastic action. Already by 12:55 p.m. Central Standard Time on March the 2nd, okay? They have added over 300 new cases and 11 deaths today. On Friday, 2/28, Washington State began to confirm the same amount of community spread cases. They now have even more than Italy had in that time frame. And for some reason that I will never understand, they have chosen to only close a couple schools for a couple days to scrub them down with some bleach. They have quarantined no one but the contacts of the cases that we know of, which at least is a little bit of something, but it is vastly wrong. And it is going to result in deaths, preventable deaths of thousands of Americans. I don't understand. Italy was our crystal ball, people. Iran was our crystal ball. Wuhan was our crystal ball. We have one. We can see into our future. Okay? We see that if we implement immediate mass quarantines, that we can reduce the number of cases and we can save lives. We have another very big problem. And like I said, fact check me on this. I don't care. Fact check everything I say. I will not tell you anything that I have not fact checked. We also have a situation in Washington State that we don't understand yet. One of the things is the strain of the virus that is present in the patients in Washington State has genetic variations that we've only ever seen in two cases that were in China. This is a different strain. It has a genetic variation from the original strain. In 8 weeks, we've tried to learn this virus, which we have failed to fully, learn. And now it's already changed. And what's spreading in Washington State is the genetically changed version. Now, when viruses mutate and change genetically, it can do good things and it can do bad things. Good things would be, let's say it was killing host with too much ferocity and the virus wanted to keep surviving, so it mutated to be less lethal. Or you can have a virus that mutates and becomes more lethal. When you're calculating the fatality rate after the fact of an epidemic, you take the number of dead and you divide it by the total number of confirmed cases. And of course, you move your decimal point back over to the right 2 places to get your correct percentage, correct? So right now with, sorry, little burp, for the 2 cases that died in Washington State of our total nationally confirmed cases, an artificially low estimate that would normally be used in hindsight is it's got a 2.2% mortality rate. However, if you convert that to use the mortality rate calculation that is best suited during an active epidemic, which is you take the number of dead and you divide that by the number of recovered plus dead, okay? So easy in the United States right now. We have 9 people who have recovered and we have 2 people who have died. Divide 2 by 11. What do you get? 18.1% mortality rate so far on American soil. Does that show that we're doing too hot? No, we're not. I don't understand what the complacency is I don't understand why people think, well, only 80% get a flu-like illness. You realize that still means that 1 in 5 people who catch this end up in the hospital because they are so sick. Okay? A mortality rate, if it was, pray to God it's only 2%. Even if it is 2%, that's 2 people out of every 100 people die. That's 20 times, not 20 more, 20 times more than die from the flu each year. And as our president so wonderfully pointed out, we lose up to 61,000 people a year in a flu season. So go ahead and multiply that number by 20 and tell me how cool you are with that happening this year. And it'll be worse than that because we have vaccines for the flu, of which 174.1 million Americans received this year. Meaning that even though this is a bad flu year, we've had 100 children die and lots of elderly people and people with underlying conditions and healthy young people. We've had thousands die this year from flu already. And we're talking about a disease that's 20 times more lethal at the best case scenario. So go ahead, take 60,000, multiply it by 20. I haven't even done it because it's freaking horrifying. So let's do 60,000 as the president pointed out. So shocking that many people die of flu each year. Times 20. It's 1,200,000. So yeah, because flu's been around for centuries in the human population, we're kind of complacent. We've accepted long ago, since we were born, the day we were born, we have been accepting of, we know of the virus, the flu. We encounter it. Most of us, it just really sucks for a few days. We feel awful. We feel like we're going to die, but we don't. And for unfortunately 1 person in every 1,000 people in America who catch the flu, it's fatal. But with this virus, it is novel. That means a lot of things. That means that there is not 1 person in America that is immune. There is not 1 person who is vaccinated. People also say, only 80% have mild symptoms. That's horrible. That is how pandemics happen, because the sick people where it's not as bad for them do not know that they have the dangerous virus and separate themselves from the healthy people, and it passes like wildfire. And that's what's going to happen with this disease, and 2 out of every 100 people who catch it will die. So even comparing it to the flu, which apparently our government loves to do now, to help calm down the impact and calm us down and chill us out a bit, if it does what the flu does and only infects the portion of the nation that is infected by the flu each year, but it won't, it'll infect many more. But if it was to do that and it only killed about the same, infected the same population, and we still had the 2% death rate, that's literally 1.2 million Americans dead by the end of this year from this virus. And this is only wave 1. I don't have a lot of hope the summer months will calm it down, as we see the hot, dry desert of Iran has absolutely had no effect on this virus. The warm tropical climate of South Korea has had no effect on this virus. So I don't think, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, I don't see any scientific evidence, since this virus is not anything we've ever seen before, from what it's doing in the desert, the hot, dry desert, and what it's doing in the warm tropical areas in South Asia. There is no scientific evidence whatsoever that weather is going to have any effect on this virus. So just be aware of that. And even if it did, the 1918 Spanish flu, the summer months did have some impact because it was a flu virus and it behaved in that way. So it did dip in the summer of 1918. And then in October alone, of 1918, when it came back for the winter cold and flu season, it killed 185,000 Americans in October. From what we understand, this virus is more contagious than flu, so it'll infect more overall. Whereas seasonal flu infects 1.3 people per infected person, spreads it about the same with the 1918 Spanish flu. And we still had 675,000 Americans die. The estimates are anywhere between 500,000 to 675,000 that year. And that was a disease that wasn't nearly as contagious. Now, there's lots of estimates for the infectivity of this virus, the R naught factor, how many people each infected person infects. So, best case scenario, this is only 2 to 4 times as contagious as flu. Although our researchers at Los Alamos National Laboratory recently, in the past week, have put out a new study in which they analyzed a very large data set from China, and they also used various contingencies within their data sets to account for potentially some mild cases were missed or things like that. They came out and they said that it appears that the true RO factor of this virus is 4.7 to 6.6 when it's left unchecked to run through a population with no restraints. Right now, from what I calculate, the virus must have at least an RO factor of 2.8 to 5 to have accomplished what it's accomplished. Now, how did I come to that conclusion? If the virus, the way it moves let's talk a little bit about that. From the day that you become infected and don't know you've become infected till the day you die, if you're going to die of the virus, takes 20 days. It takes an average of about 6 days from the time you got infected before you start to feel symptoms. About a day 11 into the course is when you on average, present to the hospital from the day you were infected. So about 5 days after your symptoms onset on day 11 is when people tend to show up at the hospital. Then from that time, they typically die from presentation to the hospital, by day 20 to 22. So what we have here is a virus that even if you're gonna die from it, you won't be sick enough to die from it till about 11 days in from the time you were exposed initially. And that's how it's going to spread far and wide. All our data lags 20 days from the initial infected. So in Washington State, for example, we have several cases of community spread that aren't arising from the nursing home cluster. They're individual. We know we have 4 individuals total that are examples of community spread that we cannot link back to that nursing home cluster. They all carry the virus with the genetic variations only seen twice in China, which point to they came from an original patient 0 who's carrying the mutated, genetically altered version of the virus. We know this from our research. So therefore, knowing this in our research, we can say that the people who are currently infected are at least 3rd generation in the infection chain. Okay, so we have patient 0 and we have the, 2.8 to 11 people on average that that person infected. So we're calling it, even if we underestimate it and we say only 2.8, okay? So let's say it's 2.8. So patient 0 infected those people. Those people, at the minimum, were the ones who infected the people we know as the infected of Washington State. They are removed from the person who traveled. They did not know them. They did not contact them. They contacted someone that person infected. And we better hope to God that was generation 2, that group that patient 0 infected. Because if the cases we're seeing are already 4th generation cases or 5th generation that have gotten to the point of death, then we have a serious epidemic on our hands that we cannot stop, because that was 20 days ago that generation 3 to 5 became infected, and we don't know how far removed from the original these guys are yet. So we can say that because of that already with the 20-day delay between the day those people got sick and the day they died. That means they were infected 20 days. They were infected on February the 9th and February the 10th if they followed an average disease course for what we know of this disease. So what we saw happen this weekend was the result of what the virus had already done February 9th and February 10th of this year. Now, since then, it's gone on and continued its transmission chains and infected new generations of transmission. The person who was infected their several people that each person's going to infect. Those people are branching out and infecting the next generation who are already branching out and infecting the next. That's a problem. We have a serious epidemic cluster in Washington state that is growing exponentially by the day. Since we did locate the nursing home, thank God, and we have trimmed that branch off the infection chain, we reduced exponentially some of the numbers of infections, which is good news. For each one person that we catch and we isolate, we stop an exponential growth transmission chain off that one person. We still have a bunch out there and we don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. I saw friends that I know travel from San Antonio to Washington and back this weekend to Seattle. We have people moving like that nonstop every day. We have flights from Seattle boarding and flying to all our other major international airports. We have people from all over the rest of the country flying to the Pacific Northwest and flying home. I guarantee this virus is hopping along with some of these guys and they're seeding our country all over the place. We're being seeded from that area because we have not quarantined. Do you think China chose to mass quarantine and tank their economy for no good reason? Hell no. They saw the face of the beast and they responded accordingly. And in the only way of maintaining a quarantine with greater than 95% efficacy, can you tame it? Italy attempted a week quarantine. It's been ineffective. Iran has taken limited steps. They've closed schools, they've stopped Friday prayers, they've done a lot of things, and still 7 of their highest government officials are infected. 1 of them has now died, which was the advisor to the president. And they just have way more deaths than Italy already, which points to their epidemic started a little sooner. And so they've already seeded. We have travelers coming out of Egypt that are positive in Santa Clara County, California, in Canada, in Germany, and Egypt still reports 1 case. So if Egypt is already exporting this to Germany, they've exported it to Canada, and they've exported it to the west coast of the United States, as well as a couple of these other little dots are responsible coming from people in Egypt. Egypt has an epidemic that is at least as bad as Italy or Iran, because this is what we saw in the days before Iran, the 2 days before Iran declared that they had a problem and started mass reporting cases. We had travelers popping up in Lebanon and Canada from Iran that had carried the virus already on their back. So it had already widespread community spread. Same thing in Egypt, which means it's probably spreading into Sudan, Chad, Libya, and potentially already down into Ethiopia, and cross back potentially into Saudi Arabia. So we have that problem. And this is undetected. It should look just like Iran or Italy in its size of dot over Egypt. We are missing a cluster and we are missing a serious source of infection, and it is jumping all over the world from there already. That is a problem. How many other countries on this map with no dots or 1 dot have done that? We don't know, but we'll start seeing the cases in travelers before the country reports it, most likely. We'll have travelers testing positive in the countries that are screening anyone with symptoms. We now have community spread in Florida. In the U.S., we have a community spread case. 1 is a traveler, 1 is community spread. We have community spread in Chicago. We have community spread in the area of Sacramento, San Francisco, in this whole region in here. We have cases of community spread where we don't know where they came from. We have a cluster here. We have a serious cluster up here. Hopefully, the school teacher out of Oregon in this cluster of community spread, hopefully they're somehow linked to these guys. This cluster, this dot by tonight is going to jump and be big. Chicago, it's only a matter of time now that they have community spread. They have community spread in Florida. We're not quarantining. We're not closing schools. We've closed a couple little schools in this area to wipe them down with bleach. That's going to be a problem. A serious, serious problem. Let me show you our crystal ball. Let's take a little look on here. Let's go ahead and check out Worldometer, which is a lovely site. And let's take a little peek here at our future. Italy, right here, on 2/21, had their 2 community spread and took drastic action. Today, they've had 11 deaths, bringing their total to 52. They've added 335 new cases, and they've had over 2,000 reported cases in total. Okay? Exactly 1 week to the day that Italy found out, and we already knew this was happening in Italy. It happened in Washington State. It happened in Chicago, and it happened in Florida, and it happened in California. We have yet to take any action. And so in 1 week, this is how Italy looked, just like the US looks right here. This is exactly how Italy looked. A couple days after they found out that their cluster, it looked just like this. Now this is where we are. Okay, in Italy, this is our crystal ball, and this is our future. Except for worse, because at least Italy did take measures. Watching that baseball game go on in Seattle this weekend just filled me with such dread. In the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, we had a small cluster that popped up, mostly confined to a military base. I believe it was near Philadelphia. It was one of our major cities. So I believe it was near a military base in Philadelphia. They were also having this big parade to help sell war bonds. And even though a doctor strongly suggested that, I don't know, we have this little cluster of illness right here in the city, maybe we shouldn't go on with this parade. They went on with the parade and just got ravaged by the Spanish flu epidemic within the next few days. I mean, the whole city went down with it. It was horrific. This weekend in Seattle, despite the clusters, despite the clusters, people, we let a major baseball game in a major stadium happen. All those screaming fans, their mouths wide open, screaming, the infected spewing virus, the non-infected receiving it. Talk about a super spreader event that in hindsight we're going to look at and we're going to write about as what a huge mistake we've made. I honestly thought that we would see what was working in other countries and we would follow suit. And I don't know what we're doing. I mean, this virus is only 8 weeks old. Like, yeah, it's most likely it's going to kill the elderly and kill people that have high blood pressure, heart problems, cardiovascular problems, pulmonary issues, cancer, diabetes at a much higher rate than others. The fact that we're out there telling people your children are safe, we don't know that. If you're young and healthy, you're pretty safe. We don't know that. So that's what we have to understand. And sorry, that name was actually my boyfriend. I just call him that in my phone to be funny. He knows he's not a side piece. He just demanded that I give him a cute nickname. So, he didn't want to be his name in my phone. So I told him, be careful what you wish for, and gave him a fun nickname. Anyway, back on topic. We have a crystal ball. We've dropped it. So we can scientifically say that as a very strong hypothesis that whatever happens in Italy, that Washington State, for sure, potentially Chicago, Florida, and California will all join Italy and mirror 1 week behind everything Italy does. So if you just look at Italy every day, you can determine for sure that in 1 week, this is Washington State, but worse. So this is going to be a lesser reflection because of the steps they took. Even the World Health Organization today said wherever clusters come up, there must be fast and aggressive action, which means immediately, like the day you realize we have community spread, shut the virus down, cut its transmission chains off, get host 6 feet away from the source. And we failed. So now we're going to pay the consequences. Thousands of American lives are going to be lost. And I don't know who we're supposed to blame for that, because technically no one could have stopped anything. There's no politician alive who could stop this. I mean, they're going to do the best they can. It's a pandemic. It's a virus. No one, you can't stop that, but you can slow it down. And that's what we're failing to do. And we're going to have thousands of extra preventable deaths because we failed. So press the government, drastic action, be ready to quarantine, be ready to do it, because it's our civic duty to protect our country and protect our social stability and to protect the people around us, to protect our communities. It is our civic action to comply with mass quarantines. We've got to stop it. 1.2 million dead Americans at the minimum, up to 5.4 million by the end of this year. And every day we're determining where that's going to fall in that range. And right now we're just knocking off. We're dropping the ball. We have a crystal ball. Here it is, the rest of the world, it happening in other countries, what it looks like. We're not that different from Italians. I mean, come on. How, American bodies aren't any more immune to this than anybody else. This is what it's going to do to us. Absorb the damn reality, and let's push our political people. Okay? Let's push them and say, hey, we're willing to do it. Go ahead and do it. Pull the trigger. Quarantine. We have community spread here. Let's protect our people. That's all we can do, guys. Stock up your stuff. Get ready for quarantine and be willing to quarantine. Do not go back and forth between friends' houses under quarantine. Do not go visit your family members under quarantine. Literally, we must maintain a 95% or greater compliance with the quarantine inside our homes. 95% of people cannot move outside their homes during the quarantine. Please don't break the quarantine. You're killing people when you do. I don't know what else to tell you. Literally at this point, my fellow Americans, may God be with us.